Dear colleagues and guests, let's start our session. It's time. Let me declare open the session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Thesis by Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich for the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences, Specialty 10-0110 Journalism, on the subject of travel media text in modern Russian journalism, on the examples of glossy magazines. According to the order 6026 of the 3rd of June 2019, myself, Boris Yakovlevich Misonjnikov, Doctor of Philology, Professor of the Department of Digital Media Communications at St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Let me introduce my fellow council members. Teplyashina Alla Nikolaevna, Doctor of Philology, Professor, Department of Digital Media Communications, St. Petersburg University. Svetova Natalia Sergeyevna, Doctor of Philology, Professor of the Department of Media Linguistics at St. Petersburg University. Ponomarov Evgeny Rudolfovich, Doctor of Philology, Professor of Literature and Children's Literature at St. Petersburg State Institute of Culture. In the remote interactive mode, we have Gregory John Simons, Doctor of Philology, Uppsala University, Sweden. First, let me emphasize that according to the Federal Law number 127 on 23rd of August 1996, on science and the state, technical and scientific policies, St. Petersburg University has the right to award academic degrees independently. A corresponding order number on the procedure for awarding the academic degrees in Petersburg University, on the basis of which we are holding this session of the Council, was issued on the 1st of September 2016. Order number 6821/1, hereinafter the order. In accordance with the order, the session of the Dissertation Council is duly constituted if at least 2/3 of its approved members are participating, but not less than 4 persons. Our Dissertation Council consists of 5 members. 5 members are present, including 1 member of the Council in remote interactive mode. Thus, there is a quorum. Let me set forth the procedure of today's session with a total duration of no more than 2 hours. Item 1, the Chairman's brief report on the main contents are the documents submitted by the candidate and their compliance with the relevant regulations. Answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. A brief presentation by the applicant outlining the key points of his study, 15 minutes. Questions to the applicant strictly on his report, no more than 5 minutes per question. Answers of the applicant. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council with their reviews, with statements of their positions, questions and suggestions to the applicant, no more than 10 minutes for each speaker. Speech by the Chairman and his review. Answers of the degree applicant to questions and remarks of members of the Dissertation Council, no more than 15 minutes. Open discussion, speeches of all the attendees with a summary of their positions, and all with specific questions and suggestions to the dissertation strictly on the topic of the research, no more than 5 minutes per person. To do that, all the speakers are kindly requested to put their names on the registration sheet and introduce themselves before speaking. Final answers of the applicant to the questions asked, no more than 5 minutes. Speech of the academic supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. a 5-minute discussion before the open voting on awarding or not awarding the academic degree to the candidate. For the time of this discussion of the council members, the broadcast shall be suspended. Open individual voting. The chairman of the dissertation council shall count the votes and results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. A decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree to the applicant. The closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Before we start the official procedure, let me remind you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you for your understanding. Let me also inform you that our meeting shall be recorded and broadcast online at the St. Petersburg University website, and the speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian to English or from English into Russian. So I shall now begin the meeting and with our first item, the chairman's summary report. The thesis of Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich for the degree of Candidate of Philological Sciences and Specialty 10-01-10, Journalism, on the theme Travel Media Text and Modern Russian Journalism on the example of glossy magazines, was accepted for defense by the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 3rd of June 2019, order number 6033/1. The dissertation council was appointed on the 3rd of June 2019 by the order number 6026/1, and I have already presented its members to you, dear colleagues and guests. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University the following documents. Application to the Rector of St. Petersburg University, Professor Kropotchev, on acceptance of the thesis for consideration and defense, submitted on the 3rd of March 2019. An evaluation from academic supervisor Julia Borisovna Balashova, Doctor of Philology, Professor of the Department of History of Journalism at St. Petersburg University. A list of 7 publications which set out the main scientific findings of the thesis, including 5 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. A certificate of candidate examination dated 5th of December 2018, number 048359, issued by St. Petersburg University, stating that Ivan Vladimirovich Kalinin passed the candidate examinations in journalism with an excellent mark, in history and philosophy of science, and in English with a good mark, diploma and graduation from the postgraduate course number AS 00198, issued on the 1st of August 2017 at St. Petersburg by St. Petersburg State University, certifying that by the decision of the State Attestation Commission dated June 27, 2017, Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich was awarded qualification researcher, lecturer, researcher. A conclusion of the organization where the work was written, St. Petersburg University, and the thesis in Russian and English in hard copy on the rights of manuscripts and in the electronic form. The thesis is designed in accordance with the requirements of GOST R 7.0, which means printed on a multiplier device with an indication of the output data, according to GOST R 704. It should be noted that all the documents listed above comply with Clause 12, Section 3, Thesis Presentation and Defense, the procedure for awarding the academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. Annex 1 to the order. Now let's hear the applicant's summary report, not more than 15 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear Chairman, dear members of the Dissertation Council, and dear guests. Your attention, let me present to you the thesis for the degree of candidate of philological sciences on the theme Travel Media Text in Modern Russian Journalism. Are the example of glossy magazines. Speaking about the relevance of my study, it should be noted that today the importance of travel in media discourse is increasing. In this regard, there's a need for typological separation of media texts with a semantic dominant journey in the modern realities of media system transformations, taking into account changes in the nature of media consumption and methods of media production. The glossy format of a printed publication is a vivid expression of cultural meanings associated with travel. However, today, there's a tendency for glossy travel journalism to gradually disappear, and its functions are being redistributed among other media players, primarily in the digital space. Such diversity of the aims of the creators of the travel media text complicates the functional differentiation of media texts about travel, requiring the use of additional methods to separate texts that carry an independent travel ideology from problem political, country studies, environmental, and other types of publications. The aim of my study is to create a functional model of the travel media text taken both in the diachronic and synchronic aspects. For this purpose, we had to perform the following tasks. Identify the main theoretical approaches to the study of the travel text. Identify genesis of the typological elements of a travel media text. Trace the historical process of emergence of the travel media text in the beginning of the 20th century. Describe the development of travel journalism in modern Russia. Consider travel media text in the context of audio-visual and network communication channels. Identify peculiarities of the text about travel in the print media, emphasizing the problem and ideological aspect of travel journal and the advertising intention in a glossy edition for lifestyle. And finally, determine the specifics of the travel media text in a traveler magazine. The ideological component of the travel media text seems to be of value in itself. Travel is regarded as a kind of game that interrupts the process of everyday life and is beyond the immediate satisfaction of needs and passions. We also proceed from the idea that ethno-cultural stereotypes, which are inevitably present in any text about travel, are largely formed by the society and its culture, which brings us to the historical cultural understanding of the travel media text. Following the Italian researcher Sabrina Francescani, we consider the media text about travel and tourism as having a high grammatical complexity, lexical density, and perceived before making the proposed trip, which implies the presence in the travel media text of organizational function and incentive intention. The category of travel media text was previously considered exclusively in the works of St. Petersburg researcher Tamara Redkina. At the same time, there's an array of scientific literature affecting the object and subject of the dissertation. We have divided the relevant theoretical works into three concepts: literary criticism, media linguistics, and marketing. At the same time, there were no works that considered the universal aspects of the organizational and scientific text on travel, representing a model or typological scheme that takes into account the linguistic and cultural characteristics of the audience. Ways to attract its attention and the axiological specifics of travel. Since the typology of journalistic text about travel is rather blurred today, the definition of a travel media text on a simultaneous level is problematic. In order to conceptualize this concept, we have turned to its historical context, which explains the inclusion of historical sources in the empirical base. The next slide shows a total empirical data set, historical and modern sources. The modern sources can be divided into printed media, such as travel magazines, lifestyle magazines, traveler magazines, etc. Audio and audiovisual sources, television and radio programs about travel, internet, video blogs, groups of glossy magazines and social networks. And in addition, interviews with managers and staff of glossy magazines, books, position travelogues, and regulatory documents. to determine the relations of continuity genesis of the travel media text, we use the cultural and comparative historical methods. In working with historical, we use the incentive conceptual content analysis. In a special case is a method of visualizing the process of travel. The method of modeling is used to present the results of our research. Additional methods include interviewing and analyzing the archived sources as means of collecting and verifying information. The text about a journey is closely connected with the historical and cultural context and its representation in the Russian linguistic culture, begins in the genre medieval walks. However, the embodiment of the concept of travel, the interpretation of the semantic frame and of the country and its slots such as language, people, customs, nature, as well as the use of an advice as a speech action or incentive appeared in the Russian literature thanks to the innovation of Nikolai Karamzin, in particular its famous Letters of the Russian Traveler and the Moscow magazine. In the beginning of the 20th century, more than 20 new magazines appeared where travel was presented as a route, a kind of leisure and recreation, a way of exploring the world, cultural enrichment and aesthetic pleasure. Travel journalism, along with special tourist literature, became the main organizing, motivating and enlightening force for communication in the tourist community. Travel media text is emerging, which is conditioned by the needs of the industry and the audience, development of the infrastructure and the print media system. Thus, on the basis of theoretical literature and historical sources, a model of a travel media text was created, which includes 7 key elements shown on this slide. Below, we will consider examples of how this model is implemented at the present stage. Using the presented categorical categories in the analysis of empirical data. There's a variety of formats of presenting tourism topics on modern television. One of the brightest and most dynamically developed TV genres implementing the model of travel media text is a travel show. Audiovisual experience in a tourist text plays a smaller role than the visual one. Therefore, the concept of travel rather than full-fledged structure of the travel media text is realized by the radio channels. Over the past decade, there's been rapid growth in the popularity of tourist issues in the YouTube space. As for the travel media text in social networks, its organization is subordinated to the evaluation of fragments of content, the content which is not important. Attention is drawn to superficial techniques. The group and public, in terms of user research, can be significantly larger than the glossy magazine audience, but in terms of engagement, social media subscribers are inferior to magazine readers. This slide shows the presence of elements of the travel media text in 10 largest Russian language tourist video blogs, each of which analyzed which 10 issues of which we analyzed. For example, such an element of travel media text as polycode, creolization, multimodality was present in all 10 issues of all 10 channels. At the same time, for example, there's no incentive or organizational function. That is, some materials are not related to the travel media texts. The next slide shows 3 groups of magazines in which we analyze travel media texts. On the left, you may see traveler magazines which are oriented to the company of the actual traveler. The second group, these are travelogue journals, publications dominated by popular, environmental, political, ethnographic and other publications about other countries. The third group are lifestyle magazines, where travel media text becomes an element of the glossy picture of the world. The main purpose of the text on tourism here is primarily to advertise goods and services. As an example, let's mention that the issue of the National Geographic Traveler, where there are 11 texts about travel, 5 of which are travel media texts. as they have all 7 criteria of the proposed model. Empty cells signify that this sign of travel media text is missing in the material. The findings of the study reflected in the main regulations, in the main points proposed for discussion. The travel media text differs from travelogue and problem political text about other countries in the presence of the organizational function and incentive. A precondition for the emergence of the travel media text model in the Russian journalism was the issue of Moskovsky Journal by Karamzin. The scientific dominant feature of the magazine was the letters of Russian traveler. The transition from a conceptual embodiment of the journey to a digital representation that slots the frame of the country. Due to the increased importance of travel and other factors in the beginning of the 20th century, the main features of the travel media text model, which combine the traditions of travel literature with the practical side of the guidebook. Integral elements or attributes of the functional model of the travel media text are reflection of the concept of travel, disclosure of the frame of the country on the example of specific element slot, route details, incentive intention, organizational function, interaction with the ethnic-cultural stereotypes of the audience, and the polycode. In the modern Russian media system, the travel media text manifests itself in various types of media. Travel shows, video blogs, photo hostings, glossy magazines, travelers, as well as radio programs about travel and social networks. And the travel media text is a meaningful and functional basis of a glossy tourist magazine that combines aesthetic, educational, and advertising components. Verification of my research results was carried out in the theoretical and practical terms, which you may see in this slide. That's it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Ivan. You were exactly on time, dear colleagues and guests. Does anyone have questions to the applicant strictly related to his presentation? And let's not spend more than 2 minutes on each question. Any questions? Please introduce yourself.
Я прошу прощения, нужно выйти, вот слева стоит трибуна, нажать кнопочку на микрофоне, говорить в микрофон.
Please use the microphone. You said that the readers of social media are less engaged than magazine readers. What made you say that? Thank you for this question. Subscribers to public groups are less interested and less involved as the readers of glossy magazines. That is why of course, subscribers to public groups are more numerous, but they are less involved, and while the impact on such audience is much lower. So how did you measure this? Valentina Golubeva. And where are you from? A doctor of the economic sciences, and my thesis was also connected with tourism. Does anyone else have questions? Dr. Ponomarev, you said in your presentation that not all the YouTube videos included incentive intention, and did you take the hidden indirect intention into imperative into account? Because that was, in my experience, it's present in many videos. Thank you, Dr. Pomerov, for your question. First of all, the incentive intention I was looking for was an incentive that would motivate a reader to go on a trip. And of course, there could be other types of intentions, such as buying a particular product, not directly connected with taking a trip. So if the intention is hidden but could be identified, of course we took it into account. But of course, when a reader is encouraged to buy a particular product of a particular brand, that has nothing to do with travel. Please introduce yourself. Use the microphone. And I don't have an academic degree. I am retired. Hello. Hidden. What do you think about hidden advertising? Musical videos as a variety of media text are very common today, and of course they have an advertising intention. Well, the question is if a music video meets the requirements of travel media text, and in that respect, music videos cannot be described strictly as travel media texts, though of course that's a very interesting sphere, and this genre is very popular. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions, dear colleagues? Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's proceed, and let me start reading the reviews, including external reviews. We have not had any, there's been no external reviews, so we'll start with the reviews of the council members and of the council chairman. This is Dr. Teplyashina. Let me start my speech by saying the name and the contents of the study. Includes travel media text and modern Russian journals on the example of glossy magazines. So in many studies, such subtitles are not motivated, and the main subject theme of the study is already given in the title. And well, the author sometimes tries, but in this thesis, the structure of the name is absolutely, even though the author speaks of the relevance of his results, goes far beyond materials that he has analyzed, and well, he analyzes much more material than on the glossy magazines. I think that the author's conclusions are very valuable, that the role of travel as a form of social and cultural activity and a type of media project, the concept of travel embodied in travel media texts represents dynamics of a new media, and represents a specific system of values and ideals. And well, another important conclusion of the authors refers to the modern journalist practice common in 2014-2019, which was hard times for travel publications, where texts about travel replaced the ideology of travel with political, which often leads to myths and stereotypes. We believe that the significance of these conclusions goes beyond the immediate subject of analysis, and the structure of a table on page 185 can be an example of clearness for any researcher who sets himself the task of study the mass media. The relevance of the thesis is explained by the need to introduce new knowledge on development of new journalist context and how publications react to new needs in cultural and leisure practices, how functions and perspective travel journalism in at the time of transformational media system. The theoretical importance of the thesis is explained by a comprehensive approach to its subject. Well, the functional model and conclusions can be a basis for further theoretical study of issues related to the empirical data and conclusions can be used by wide number of specialists, media researchers, marketologists, travel agents, regulators who deal with the task to develop the travel industry, enhance quality of and improving the image of our country as exporter of travel services. This complex approach means a combination of historical, cultural and comparative methods complemented by intentional and conceptuological analysis of empirical material, which together enable the author to present a full picture of genesis and development of travel journalism and travel media text as its matrix. It should be noted that the author's approach includes simultaneous discussion of micro variables from the different levels of a piece of journalism, concept, frames and slot. In joint consideration of these aspects is the key positive feature of the selected algorithm of study. Novelty of the thesis lies not only in creating a model of travel media text, which researchers have not done before, but in analyzing its components in the framework of a universal system of typological possibilities, where the author says the basis of this model is the following features: actualization of lingua-cultural, lingua-cognitive concept of travel, representation of frame, the other country, as on the basis of a specific element slot, detailed routes, documented factual verification, intention, organizational function, interaction with ethno-cultural stereotypes, and the polycode. The potential of interaction of three media texts on the audience, mechanism of drawing its attention and promoting specific leisure practices. And so here I quoted Ivan Kalinin. Well, practical significance of Mr. Kalinin's thesis lies in the fact that his model of travel media text can be used by the journalists of surviving glossy magazines, as well as journalists of other types of media, as well as in video blogging and advertising. In the first chapter, the author focuses on social cultural aspect of travel media text. Mr. Kalinin analyzes the modern contemporary studies. His in-depth analysis of scientific literature enables the author to conclude that the concept of travel media text stands out from other types of media text, and its study is possible with the help of different approaches, methodologies and terminology, which enable the development of cultural and texture tradition about travel, its place in the modern world, and determine its efficiency in organization of travel and promotion of companies. That's, I'm quoting page 28. Among the benefits, strong points of the thesis, we should mention typological analysis of travel media text model on the basis of literal media linguistics and marketing approaches. Such comprehensive approach enabled the author to identify key features of travel media text, which seems to be a very good solution. The conclusion of the applicant that travel media text as media text about travel and tourism has a temporal dimension, addresses an event that has already taken place, the trip of the author, also to the future, the trip that will be repeated by the reader. Mr. Kalinin is absolutely right when he says that the time of the text brings travel media text closer to texts of restaurant, theater, and other criticism. The applicant he gives his own definition of travel media text as a such a media text where the dominant feature is travel and the key function urging the reader to take the trip or its organization. Analysis of travel media text includes a simultaneous consideration of different aspects. The author is very aware of definition of such concepts as frame slot, the polycode, and other logically independent aspects. The knowledge of the author and his ability to differentiate the complex linguistic phenomenon is very impressive. In the second paragraph of chapter 1, the author pays tribute to the history of travel journalists, speaks of the key features to be found in archaic texts, including antique novels and heroic poem, genre of Russian medieval works. Mr. Kalinin characterizes the work of Nikolai Karamzin as travelogue, describing the Moscow journal as super text, which brought together materials with a meaning dominant travel and make an interesting comparison with structure of modern traveler magazine. On the example of archived documents and articles, the author describes the status of traveler and tourists and made an important conclusion on elite. Signifies the difference between elite and mass culture. We find the applicant's approach to analysis of texts composed in the 18th and 19th century, first of all of Nikolai Karamzin, using the modern linguistic approaches, which he applies to the analysis of modern media texts. The author was able to demonstrate a history of development of travel journalism, rooted in fiction. And here's a great example of such comparative analysis is the book by Frigat Paralel by Ivan Goncharov. Starting the analysis of media text in the beginning of the 20th century, the applicant claims that at that period the travel media text model brought together the experience of literature with practicality of a guidebook. At the same time, two types of media text, advertising and writers' media text, have emerged. It's interesting that specific features of the concept of travel in the writer's text, in the author's text, plays a greater cultural role because it discloses the author's vision of new territory, demonstrates the differences of everyday experience of the reader. Mr. Kalinin proposes his own vision of the situation in literature of the 20th century and the need to emphasize uniqueness of each particular neighborhood, and advises that contemporary journalists should take this into account. In paragraph 3 of the 3rd chapter, the author deals with the organizational function of travel media in magazines at the beginning of the 20th century. The author also gives classification of magazines preceded by the typological analysis. Such close attention to this period of history of travel journalism is explained in the chapter 2, that a functional model of travel media text emerged in the beginning of the 20th century, which was explained by the needs of the industry and the audience, development of the structure and system of printed media. In chapter 2, the author pays much attention to the polycode text, analyzes interaction of text components, verbal, visual, audio-visual, though the author does describe radio contact, the combination of which creates the effect of polymodal. The great attention is paid to the main sphere of using the polycode test, glossy magazine and the crisis magazine, and the crisis in which such publications are currently undergoing. The second chapter persuades that the author has achieved his goals. The list of literature used by the applicant can be described as another valuable result of his study, as this is very long, yet unfortunately it doesn't include an article by a famous sociologist, Zygmunt Bauman, from pilgrim to tourist. Maybe the author is not familiar with the article, but I think that speaking of drawbacks of the thesis of Mr. Kalinin, I would like to point out the following. In our opinion, deeper theoretical reflection is a discourse of national magazines on travel. This part of the thesis will be very interesting and closer to the theme than including a paragraph on travel media text in audiovisuals media. Secondly, the author studies travel media in Russian and glossy magazine as the media of its functioning, yet the object of this study should be, we call the object of this study a phenomenon, a process. This is the part of scientific knowledge that the author should study. The subject in a scientific work is a component, but specific component of selected, chosen. This is a specific issue. Well, this meaning is narrower, and very often the subject of study is stated as the subject theme. The next fragment of the thesis shows that the object and the subject are not clearly differentiated. Let me quote. Understanding the subject of my study took differentiation of Dobrosklonkaya on the ability of media texts to unite texts of different nature. Thirdly, the author refers to archive documents, but does not explain which method he used to select such documents. And there's a number of the author claims applies to the degree of candidate of philology, but yet there are some lexical mistakes. For example, today we witness big interest, for example, for researcher Yerefeeva Mirdesk as a result of purpose-oriented creative work. For media text has the following functions. Travel media text is characterized, included in media linguist. There's no such concept as media linguist. On the other, says concept travel, frame the other country, interaction with stereotype, auditory and the polycode, interaction with stereotype of the audience. I think this is also a mistake. The wording is wrong. Organized travel, middle of 1990s, became a holiday. In general, these drawbacks, these critical remarks. I made these critical remarks because in general, the thesis of Mr. Kalinin is quality is high, and the main results of the published in 9 publications, including magazine included in the list of Ministry of Science and Education. The thesis of Mr. Kalinin, travel media text in modern Russian journalism on the example of glossy magazines, meets the key requirements set forth by the order of the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the applicant, Mr. Kalinin, deserves to be awarded a degree of candidate of philological sciences, specialty 10.01.10 journalism. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dr. Teplyashina. Let us give the floor to Professor Tsvetova. Dear colleagues, I agree with Dr. Teplyashina, who had no doubt about relevance of the work. The list of reasons which prove relevance of the thesis can be increased. This is not only about ideology of travel and the need to improve the algorithm of image formation of different territories. We may also include axiological status of problems dealt with by the author, and it should be the need for such research. Let me also remind that the Higher School of Journalism and Mass Communication of St. Petersburg University already launched a master's program on travel journalism, and the textbooks, the methodology for this program are now in process of development, and I think that among the achievements of Mr. Kalinin include creation of perfect logical research story which follows the national scientific tradition and is aware of the key international research. The stories, even though the thesis is much longer than is required, but this does not appear to be a drawback of the author. Secondly, the story has an important component of the story is the historical scientific description, which affected the quality of the terminological basis. Mr. Kalinin, indeed, I'm quoting, used methods applied in different schools of research in Russia and abroad. And this enabled us to get a wide impression of the essence of travel media texts at a multidisciplinary level. And such huge scientific context makes the situation of a young researcher more difficult. Mr. Kalinin succeeded to create his own concept of travel media text based on serious contemporary literature studies, marketing, Vladimirovich ideas. Authors do not agree in their approach to many facts and phenomena. Yet it's possible to find weak parts of the concepts. For example, these are fragments connected with a segment of contemporary literary discourse, which seems to be well formed. The interest of philologists, which started in the middle of the 19th century, kept growing until the second half of the 20th century. But today still leading experts such as Guminsky do not feel that using the word travelogue is justified, and they call it the author of the concept is Sologub, a discoverer of the world of travel and travelers, 1980. But these are only relevance, which did not prevent the author to identify institutionally valuable text elements. And I think this is the key, the most important result achieved by Mr. Kalinin. Thirdly, the author of the thesis worked with huge amount and diverse empirical basis. 1,500 magazines, analysis of sources fills a particular certain gap in the understanding and understanding of the model of travel media text. I think if we had an opportunity, it would the thesis of Mr. Kalinin should be published as a textbook. There are many reasons for that. While I was reading this thesis, the only serious question that I had is intentional characteristics of media text, the contemporary media space. Mr. Kalinin, not only in his thesis but also in his articles, speak of ideological bias, political bias of travel media scores, and is giving arguments. It should be said that such characteristic of regardless of the nationality, is accepted. Mr. Kalinin found that his texts have question. Have you come across ideologically biased travel media texts? The authors were guided by ideology, intentional defamation of such type. The intention to evaluate is always present in such cases. Have you come across such cases when analyzing literature? And speaking of small, I have also some lexical comments, but I think that generally the thesis is well written, and the thesis is well written, and of course we always want the text to be ideal. All texts written here at St. Petersburg University, we always want such texts to be ideal, but I think this thesis is very nearly ideal. And last thing I would like to say, the thesis by Ivan Kalinin on the theme travel media texts in the more contemporary Russian journalism, on the example of glossy magazine, is the main requirements set forth by the order, the 1st of September 2016, with the order of academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Ivan Kalinin, deserves to be awarded the academic degree of candidate of philological sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you, Dr. Tsvetova. Let's give the floor to Dr. Ponomarev. Thank you. Study in travel media text is one of the most promising fields in the sphere of journalism. It's closely connected with interdisciplinary theoretical studies which bring together philologists, historians, anthropologists, with the aim to create a common theory of travelogue. The work of Mr. Kalinin, which composed travel media texts of the past with travel media texts of contemporary media, certainly belongs to this sphere. The thesis is divided in 2 chapters. Each chapter is approximately 100 pages long, and each chapter is highly informative. The first section of chapter 1 is devoted to theoretical issues, from definitions to comparing travelogue and trivial media texts for all the way to different opinions on the content and composition travel media text. It should be noted that the authors covered a wide range of literature in Russian and many sources in English. Thus, the theoretical background of the author is very convincing. In the same paragraph, the author identified 7 features or 7 features of travel media text which describe the phenomenon very well. In the second paragraph of chapter 1, the author reviews predecessors of contemporary travel media text, starts with medieval works and a traditional historiographical review, such as the work of the travel of Bishop Daniel, and quoting Maslova, the applicant says that such medieval texts will have many features similar to contemporary travels. The opinion of Maslova, in our opinion, is inspired by the famous saying of Likhachev on ancient Russian realism, because those medieval stories indeed contain many details, many practical details. In that case, we shouldn't speak of a long tradition, but of stable structural peculiarities of travelogue. The author narrates rather than critically analyzes opinions of his predecessors. Yet, compilation is quite common in candidate thesis. In his history of a Russian travelogue, Mr. Kalinin has chosen very well-known books, such as Journey from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and forgot such important travelogues which were popular in their time, such as the Letters of a Russian Officer by Fyodor Glinka. But in the third part of chapter 1, first he founds for his literary review an unusual viewpoint, or the organizational function of travel media text, and secondly limits his interest only to journalism, glossy mechanisms and specialized travel magazines. This changes the story completely, the game completely. Genesis of contemporary travel media text is well described through the review of preceding tradition of travel media text in the second chapter. The author says that contemporary Russian travel media text is oriented on travel journalism of the 19th, 20th century. Soviet travelogues, barely mentioned by the author, indeed belong to a different type. The second chapter of the thesis is devoted to development of travel journalism in post-Soviet Russia, and looks at peculiarities of travel media text and different types of media, with the help of 7 features listed in chapter 1. This practical part of the thesis could be seen as a complete description of entire travel journalism in modern Russia. What surprises us is that the subject theme of the thesis is a much narrower field. Glossy magazines. The author also looks at glossy magazines, but well, he also includes here travel shows. Why you didn't? Why the subject theme doesn't say travel medicine, contemporary Russian journalism should remove the subtitle in brackets. Why didn't you remove this subtitle? It seems that widening the initial subject is explained by the method of the applicant. He is not interested in travel media text, but in the conditions of its functioning and the market, and analysis in each departments of in chapter 2 is very selective, while the author looks at history of each glossy magazines, and such method is of course can be used, but we are more interested in poetry. Despite these critical remarks, the thesis is very interesting and is an interesting piece of research. The author meets the requirements set forth to thesis of the degree of candidate philological, and its author, Mr. Kalinin, deserves being awarded the degree. Thank you, Dr. Ponomarev. Now let me give the floor to Dr. Simons.
Okay, so a lot of what I am to say is already echoing what everyone else on the council has already been saying. Having read the doctoral dissertation of Ivan Kalinin in the English language version, which is on pages 275 to 516, I'm ready to offer a series of observations and draw conclusions concerning the quality of the work. The thesis concerns the evolution of travel media text in Russia from a historical and theoretical perspective. As stated by Kalinin, the topic is at an intersection of several different academic disciplines, which includes, among other things, journalism, public diplomacy, place branding, cultural and identity studies. The thesis is very informative, and the text is written in an easy-to-digest format. A very rich set of literature and data from Russian and English language sources are used to test 6 propositions that are listed on page 291 of the thesis, which is reflected in a rather extensive list of references at the end of the thesis. The stated purpose of the research, which is on page 283, is to, quote, to create a functional travel media text model studied in both diachronic and synchronic aspects. This thesis, in my opinion, is a rather remarkable feat of academic endeavour that is well considered and executed by Kalinin of this relatively under-theorised discipline. The structure of the thesis is logical and maintains a good flow for the reader. Furthermore, the actual topic, method and approach are all very well described and justified in the beginning of the thesis. The 6 propositions to be defended are all well-founded and considered and contribute towards realising the stated research purpose of the thesis. In addition, the thesis makes a use of a remarkable data set, both theoretical and empirical, in analysing the questions and supporting any statements. Kalinin needs to be commended on the extremely valuable interviews by the experts that he managed to arrange, which brought added value to the thesis. The thesis displays a balanced and well-considered approach to realising the aims and goals that are stated. In addition to the doctoral thesis, Kalinin has accumulated a rather impressive number of published articles. For this significant accomplishment, he is to be once more commended for the effort. The thesis goes very deeply into the issues and goals raised in the course of the introduction and a theoretical and empirical point of view. The expert interviews which are listed in the annex provide significant added value to the theoretical and empirical understanding of the subject. Finally, the conclusion gives a good summary of the lessons, knowledge that is contained throughout the work, although it could be further strengthened by linking some of the observations back to the current state-of-the-art research on the topic in order to test and develop more concretely the current theoretical basis. In addition, there is some, what I'd say, relatively minor criticism, which is to be given in the spirit of constructive criticism. There are some issues with the thesis, but they, as I say, are relatively minor. In places, the English language is somewhat problematic, but this, I suspect, is owing to the quality of the translation. There are a number of observable awkward translations. For example, on page 295, in domestic science. In this case, it would be better to formulate it in the national academic environment, as just one example. Another relatively minor point for the candidate to consider is the structure of the chapters of the thesis. It may be added for further clarity to the flow of the work if different topics, aspects appeared in the chapter one were actually separated. This is in reference to combining theoretical background of the work with the account of the historical development and evolution of travel text in Russia. You get more out of it by pulling these apart and separating them, treating them differently. It may have been a more fruitful approach, as I say, to have these two separate rather than blend them together. But all in all, I would also encourage Ivan to consider the following, of which there are 2 points that could be further considered, if not in the thesis, maybe at a later point in time. Perhaps to explore the evolving nature of the national character and international and national politics on the patterns of media consumption, media priorities, and media content. It is an issue that is raised indirectly but not engaged significantly, and this is the second point with the reference to the text in chapter 2.32 on the topic of Geo-magazine and the politicisation of the text within the stated time period. Sometimes it is better to state the obvious. In this case, the topic skirts the issue of public diplomacy and somewhat obstructive marketing that tends to harm the brand and reputation of the different countries which are named. And I mean, the countries named, China, Cuba, Iran, Russia, Venezuela. The quality and style of the text in a very different form of mass communication that is not mentioned, that is, coming back to that. From the text, there is an obvious political agenda and use of emotional rather than rational form of communication. There is a specific target audience that is being approached by using communicational means. It's got some indications of some kind of propagandistic use, using emotion to drive the rationality and the logic. In summary, the thesis covers a relatively understudied and under-theorized topic within the field of journalism. The strengths of the work far outweigh the weaknesses of it. This work contributes to a deeper theoretical and empirical understanding of the nature of contemporary travel media text and its theoretical and practical evolution. One thing maybe to dwell upon, and that would be that the thesis concerned the production part of travel media text, perhaps as a, if you like, a natural follow-on from this would be to start to investigate the reception part of travel media text and see how do the audience receive travel media text and consume it, and what do they think about it, its evolution, these particular points, and fitting these two together, the groundwork you've laid with your thesis, it would be very valuable to perhaps consider this point as a follow-on. So in the final point, the dissertation meets the basic requirements established in Order 6821-1 of the 1st of September 2016 on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. The candidate, Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich, deserves the award of the scientific degree of Candidate of Philology in the speciality 10.01.10 Journalism. Clause 11 of the aforementioned order by the author of the thesis is not broken. Thank you.
Спасибо, господин Григорий. Уважаемые коллеги, остался только председатель один.
It's now only the chairman of the council has to speak. Let me present my review. The theme of travel in contemporary media discourse has been interpreted widely, but it should be noted that the roots of this theme go deep in the past, and it can be described in the framework national culture, historical, philosophical and cultural tradition. But the situation in mass media and the changes in social, economic and other social situations, communication in the world, types in communication are developing very quickly, and most remote parts of the world are now becoming accessible. And events in the world are being widely covered by media. Instead of detailed descriptions, the journalism of today is more dynamic, more expressive, and often aimed at consumption. This requires different methods, and there's a need to rethinking identity of contemporary media texts dedicated to travel. That's a complex subject which requires a high level of competence. It should be mentioned that Mr. Kalinin attempted to answer a number of important issues related to this theme, which explain relevance of the topic. The author explains this as followed. The author does not limit himself to investigating the descriptive function, but aims to solve some philosophical problems. And the author recreates a complex political, cultural, ethnic, and social discourse, which is duly verbalized. With development of multimedia system, the form of narration becomes even more complicated, and is complicated by semiotic non-verbal complexes, including iconic ones. In his thesis, Mr. Kalinin touches complete of the whole potential of travel texts. In the framework of social, cultural, and leisure practices, he looks at travel phenomenon, the tendency of its textualization. The author deals with many issues of more contemporary Russian journalism, and his engagement is very impressive. And the way he deals with most complicated tasks, including his attempt to put contemporary media text into different categories, and such complicated structure as travel media text. In the beginning of his thesis, the author tries to identify the complex definition of the complex phenomenon of media text, and refers to different typological features of media text. He's quoting experts on travel media text, including Sevrugina, who said that there are four main types of travel media text, including news, information analysis and commentary, description or theme text, and features well described and advertising. The matter is that this quotation is as an opinion of an expert, in my opinion, deserves much criticism, because Dr. Sirugina is a knowledgeable expert, but in a different sphere of philological. Her main field, her main subject is linguistics of fiction rather than media text, and the subject theme of her candidate thesis, a linguistic reflection of concepts of love and beauty in Tjuchev and Warsaw. It's hard to say what encouraged her to discussion of media text, but I think this experience is hardly successful. In addition to that, Mr. Kalinin also quotes Lisitskaya and says that media text combines media and verbal text, is a link where complex nature of the language and interests and opportunities of printed media, a TV channel and station. Larissa Lisitskaya, Doctor of Philological Sciences, is a media linguist. Published monograph Pragmatic Adequacy of Media Text in the Aspect of Speech of Culture. She is a respected expert, but her idea is also not perfect. In relation with this, I would like to wish Mr. Kalinin not to limit himself to quoting existing experts, even though considered respected experts, but would encourage the author to analyze these quotes and inaccurate wording, and the very fact that sometimes says that the secondary media, secondary type of text on page 27 can be discussed. This is not criticism, but rather a comment that he can use in his future research. There are some inaccuracies which should be criticized. For example, when the author quotes Turner Alexander van Dyck, he does not spell his name correctly. It shouldn't be done like that. Sometimes the word uses the phrase printed media, which is sometimes used in scientific literature, but is inaccurate, and there are so this is not accepted. There are some. I will not go into expand more on this. And there are some misprints, which is very common. But of course, we would like to see every thesis to be ideal, but none. And the subject of the thesis is very impressive. Allow us to conclude, to make many important conclusions, and talk about novelty and a significant contribution made by the author. The conclusions of the author are well grounded, and the author achieved impressive results, and results can be used, valuable, can be valuable material for textbooks, and as mentioned already by Dr. Tsvetova, as the results of Mr. Kalinin's research can be have practical value, can be used in education, and and in general, The thesis submitted is an independent and completed study, and the thesis by Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich to the subject travel media texts in contemporary Russian journalism on the example of glossy magazines meets the key requirements set forth by the order, the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1 of the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the applicant Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich deserves to be awarded the academic degree of candidate of philological sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism. Clause 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated by the applicant. Thank you for your attention, dear colleagues. We gave our reviews. Now let us give the floor to the applicant. You have not more than 15 minutes. Dear members of the Council, first of all, I would like to thank you for your valuable comments and observations, which helped to look at the work from other points and to see its strengths and weaknesses. First, let me answer questions related to the composition of the study. According to Professor Simons, our work is not of a historical nature, so isolating the history of the travel media text into a separate chapter would, in our view, cause imbalance in the composition, although it would probably make it easier to understand. The text of my work is logically divided into two equal chapters. The first chapter deals with the theory and history of travel media text, and the second chapter deals with modern features of its existence in the Russian journalism. Next, let me respond to the comments related to history and theory. Indeed, Evgeny Rudolfovich, in the historical part of the work, the emphasis was placed on the iconic texts about journey, which are well known to modern researchers. Yet, Karamzin's letters of Russian travel are considered, first of all, because of their innovation in the presentation of the frame another country and their intrinsic value for the author of the foreign cultural reality. Its primacy in relation to the geopolitical events, which distinguishes the travel media text from the problem political texts about another country. In addition, our work in the field of journalism, and above all, it is devoted to journals. In this respect, Karamzin's activity is also remarkable, since he is the creator of the first Russian travel magazine, Moskovsky Journal, the Moscow magazine, the semantic basis of which was the famous letters. The magazine was loved by Moscow readers as well as various subscribers from different regions of Russia. Besides, from my point of view, it was Karamzin disciplines, the position combined with general cultural knowledge and education, which created in the 18th century journalistic work so similar to modern travel media texts and thus different from, for example, travelogues written during wars and geopolitical confrontations. In the moments of acute need to rethink the national identity, in this case far from the travel media text, where, for example, there are stimulating organizational moments. The reader's cultural self-consciousness also plays an important role in the travel media text, especially in its detailed forms, but it's usually more static, generalized and invisible than in ideological texts on travel. Speaking about the main additions made in the theory of travel media text, which raise a question, main additions made in the theory of travel media text, which raised the question from Professor Simons, I would like to note the novelty of the concept, distinguished by its media topics and functional features. The paper clarifies the definition proposed by Tamara Ritkina and establishes narrower boundaries of the term travel media text. The disadvantages of the initial theoretical basis which we faced in the course of the work were, first of all, the lack of comprehensive interdisciplinary research which would connect the history of development of this type of text, its speech, media and marketing components. I agree with you that the boundaries of the topic are quite broad and that the conclusions could have been based on the connection with the process taking place in the global media space. However, in the conclusion, we focused on the applied importance of the results of our work. As rightly noted in your opinion, an increase in the level of theoretization based on the empirical data obtained would eventually make it possible to establish a correlation between the processes taking place in the Russian media system and the global ones, and make the work more interesting for foreign researchers. The classification of media text by Sevrugina, as you have noted, is not really optimal. Dear Dr. Misonjnikov, is mentioned at the beginning of the in the review and in our further work, historical and practical paths, we didn't use this classification. The same applies to the concept related to the theory of public relations, where the media text is opposed to primary non-media text. We should make a comment here about the narrow utilitarian boundaries of this classification. Both statements, which have given rise to fair comments, are mentioned in this paper only as an illustration of variability of ideas about media text and high interest in this concept among various researchers. As for justification using the term travelogue, here we agree with Natalia Sergeyevna, and the paper states that, in our opinion, the boundaries of the contents, both in the theory of literature and in literary practice, remain rather blurred. However, since many modern researchers of travel texts take this concept as a basis, and the creations of travel literature use the word travelogue to describe their works in genre, we face the task of separating the terms travelogue and travel media text, which was carried out in the theoretical work, part of our work. Dear Dr. Teplyashina, you quite rightly pointed out the inaccuracies in interpretation of Dobdoklonska representation of the ability of media text to unite texts of different nature. Of course, it would be more accurate to write that this representation was taken on as a basis for understanding the object of our research. Thirdly, let us highlight the issues related to the analysis of the empirical material of the study. Travel media text as a type of text about travel is defined by us not by genre peculiarities but by functional features. That is, by the criteria that allow us to affect the addressee of different types of media. In this regard, such factors as the advertising position of the publication and the specific of its brand play, in our opinion, a somewhat more significant role than the features of the creative style of a particular author or established genre canons. At the same time, I have to agree with you, Evgeny Rudolfovich, that the work could be improved through additional analysis of poetics of travel media text, which, however, in our opinion, is more consistent with literary research. I must agree with Alla Nikolaevna that the field of glossy magazines about travel in our work could be studied in more detail. Although a fairly wide range of publications has been covered, these are travel magazines, travelers, which gravitate towards popular science and business, lifestyle magazines, including both male and female specialized. Thus, the discursive field of each of these publications is very specific. While the selection of publications, specific media text that corresponds to the categories of travel media text and the analysis of criteria of travel media text seem to be an effective strategy to achieve the goal of our study, to create a functional model of travel media text. Since the model is universal, could be applied to all types of media texts, we decided to include the analysis of other types of media as a supplement to the study of glossy journal text in the course of in our dissertation. Analysis of archival sources refers to additional research methods designed to verify and illustrate the information obtained from the analysis of historical empirical data in characterizing the process of emergence of the travel media text model. In our work, as Alla Nikolaevna, you rightly noticed, the principle of selection of these sources is not specified. It's quite simple. Since the majority of Russian travel magazines published in St. Petersburg had an office in the capital, their documents are now kept in the Central State Historical Archive in St. Petersburg, which also has an array of cases illustrating the circumstances in which Russians travel abroad. the end of 19th, beginning of the 20th century. As a rule, such documents have keywords such as travel, trip, tourist, etc., on the basis of which in the electronic catalog the cases were selected, reviewed, and important documents were copied and analyzed. Fourthly, let us highlight comments of individual provisions of the work. First of all, these are questions that is given Professor Simons concerning the analysis of publication journal in the Geo magazine. Concerning the analysis of political texts, I would like to know that we try to show scientific ethics and stay neutral without directly linking this method of communication with propaganda. That would have led to the need to move away from the topic and additional empirical testing of materials that are not the core of our research. With regard to ideological content and incentive intentions, we would like to note that the background of journals attracted authors of political, philosophical, and other problematic texts. Today, the form of a travel media text is used to convey political ideas, views on geopolitics, economics, ecology, as demonstrated by Geo magazine. But the true travel media texts we studied differ from above-mentioned categories of publications in that is the presence of incentive, organizational function, and predominance of valuable interpretation of travel. Therefore, the estimated intention of the travel media text is encountered. But above all, in terms of quality of tourist infrastructure, the convenience of the route, the overall impressions of the trip. I fully agree with you, Dr. Tsvetova, that such will deform travel media texts. There are other types of travel media texts that can be perceived by the tourist audience and affected, trying to influence values of the most educated negative group of people, the consciousness of the social elite. This phenomenon, in some extent, is noted in our work and, of course, deserves to be studied separately. And now let me focus on the proposals related to the boundaries and prospects of research. Dear Evgeny Rudolfovich, at the beginning of our work on the topic, we really planned to limit ourselves to analyzing publications only in glossy magazines. But gradually I came to the conclusion that in the conditions of modern media system, the topic implies reference to a broader journalistic context. Leading authors of traveler journals are now also working with the radio and video bloggers. Many write books about travel. Glossy magazines are currently undergoing a process of transition to virtual space, following the audience and advertiser. Therefore, part of our research attention was devoted to other channels of spreading travel media dissemination of travel media text, although most of the journals have been analyzed, both modern and historical period of the emergence of travel media text. Subject interviews designed to verify the results of our work were also conducted mainly with editors and authors of glossy travel magazines. I absolutely agree with Professor Simons that the connection between the national character and the ways of media consumption in the context of the globalization of the media space deserve a separate study. Such work can be done using the example of a travel media text as other types of media text with a strong thematic focus. And I agree with the remarks about the speech errors separately, Alla Nikolaevna. In particular, the use of word media linguist in our work is incorrect, and we should check the scientific discourse before using it. Still, I would like to say that media linguists at same as the discipline is actually developed, and it's quite possible that over the time that is especially the field of media now we can be accepted by the scientific community. There are already designations in serious scientific activity. And in the future, scientific community will accept such name, as because already we have ethnolinguist, psycholinguist, and social linguist. And about the other remarks concerning mistakes in my work and some definitions highlighted by the subject and object relations, we fully agree and thank the respected members of the Council for their work. All these comments will be taken into account in the process of further work on the topic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kalinin. Now let's, dear guests, anyone who's not a member of the Dissertation Council, if anyone has a word to say, say something about the thesis, but please introduce yourself before speaking. Professor Ludmila Gromova. Ludmila Gromova, professor, St. Petersburg University. Dear colleagues, the thesis of Mr. Kalinin was conducted the Department of History of Journalism, so the historical aspect had to be present. Of course, there is a question of to what extent, and starting with historical investigation under the guidance of Professor Balashova, Mr. Kalinin got more interested in modern issues, and so that's how his thesis got this name, which had two major outcomes. On the one hand, maybe he lost connection to the theoretical approach, and on the other hand, this is a good using Glossy magazine as an example. He was able to widen material and look at other media, and maybe that is why his thesis became such a comprehensive work. Impossible to hug the impossible, yet I think that Mr. Kalinin dealt very well with many challenges, and journalism, travel journalism in its traditional form has very little connection with the modern travel media text. Functions and values are different to reflect new cultural and economic conditions, reality. But the subject theme is relevant and interesting, and requires further research. In the second half, the author proposed a model of travel text which meets the expectations of contemporary audience, and the model of travel media text in a sense is a universal model both for journalists and for advertising, and in this here lies the practical value of the work. I think there are many beginnings which Mr. Kalinin will probably, hopefully, develop in his future research. And today we have spoken about definitions, about approaches that require development, and I think that is so we really looked forward to this thesis, and though there was a delay, we are glad to say that Mr. Kalinin completed his work eventually, which had some good effects on the text and on the author. Well, it's a shame that the thesis has such mistakes as a central state historic archive, which no longer exists. It's called State Russian Archive and is in St. Petersburg. It's located in St. Petersburg. And some other mistakes in the list of literature and in the text, but I think this, according to the author's wish, maybe he wanted to emphasize being familiar with the sources, or maybe that was only a misprint, but in any case, I think the thesis is a success, and the author deserves to be awarded the degree. Thank you. Thank you. Who else would like to speak? I feel nobody else wants to speak. Please don't go away. Maybe you would like to respond Ludmila Petrovna's speech. I just wanted to say that indeed I mean the Central Historical Archive of St. Petersburg it's a regional archive. It's not, I'm not talk about the region, the national archive, but archive of St. Petersburg, where all these documents are kept. This is a federal, and the Central State Historical Archive of St. Petersburg is the regional. We can discuss that later. Thank you. Let's give the floor to the academic supervisor, Dr. Balashova. Dear colleagues, I'm glad to be here today. And let me describe Liz. Mr. Kalinin graduated our university, and that was the last time we had at the same time he got a diploma in tourism, which shows the author being a hardworking person, and in his candidate's thesis he continued his graduation project, which where his academic supervisor was Tamara Redkina, and he's very active. He was very active student. Took part constantly in various activities at our institute and outside our institute, the Moscow State University. He made many presentations. He published many articles while he was a student. While he was a student, he made up for this lack of time after he finished his postgraduate course. I'm glad he achieved such results. Trust me, he's gone a long way, and he witnessed his growth, and I strongly recommend him to continue.
Спасибо большое, коллеги. Все.
That's it. Thank you. Okay, now, next item on our agenda is discussion. No more than 5 minutes. Members of the Dissertation Council should discuss. So for this period, please stop broadcasting, and I'm asking all the guests who are not members of the Dissertation Council to leave the room. Please leave the room, and I will ask you when the discussion is over. Thank you. Okay, everybody is back, including Mr. Kalinin. Let us resume the meeting. The meeting is resumed. Please turn the sound. The sound is on. We are on air. The most important moment of our meeting has come. I now put forward the awarding of an academic degree to the open individual voting. Let me remind you that the decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council taking part in the meeting voted for it in accordance with Article 23 of the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. Council number 1 to the order. Council member, Dr. Anna Nikolaevna Teplyashina, your opinion. I think the thesis complies with the requirements applied to such research. But also I'd like to say what made me convinced that the applicant deserves the degree is how he answered our comments, critical, and how involved he is, which he also demonstrated. I support. Thank you, Dr. Teplyashina, member of the Council, Tsvetova Natalia Sergeyevna, your opinion. Thank you. I support, and I'm voting for. Thank you, Natalia Sergeyevna. Council member Evgeny Rudolfovich Ponomarev, I support, and I am voting for. And I agree that Mr. Kalinin gave very convincing answers to our remarks. Thank you, Evgeny Rudolfovich. Gregor John Simons, your opinion, please.
My opinion agrees with what everyone else has said, so mine is positive and for Ivan Kalinin.
Thank you, Dr. Simons. And my own opinion, it's my turn. I also agree, and I'm voting for. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, let me announce that out of 5 members of the board participating, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. And the decision to award the degree of candidate of philological sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism to Kalinin Ivan Vladimirovich, has been passed. Please, your final word, Mr. Kalinin. I'd like to say thank you, give big thanks to St. Petersburg University, where I was educated, the Institute of High School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Thank you to the Department of History of Journalism, and many thanks to my academic supervisor, Julia Balashova. You encouraged my work and my development as a researcher. Thank you for coming today to support us today, and thank you for your support, for supporting me all those years. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kalinin. The session is closed. Thank you all for your participation, and please stop broadcasting.